Theodore. He's a tugboat and a friendly tugboat too. A friendly tugboat too. Oh, Theodore likes to do the things that friendly tugboats do. Pushing and a pulling in the great big harbor, in the great big world is so much fun. So many brand new things to discover. Waking with the sun, gotta get the job done. Oh, Theodore and Emily, Theodore, Hank and George, and the harbor master too.
So the episode begins with Theodore watching and waiting for Emily to help him practice getting his V word. And of course, one of the things to be a V is the knowledge of pulling ships. Once the ship is docked, Theodore and Emily head over to Willie's Island to practice.
Let's pretend we're far away at sea, said Theodore, on a big job. I know just the place, said Emily. Let's pretend Willie's Island is Spain. Spain is very far away, all the way across the ocean. Any pirates there? Wondered Theodore. Maybe, replied Emily. But if they ask you any questions, just say, sí. That means yes, yes in Spanish. See, Theodore just loved to hear words from faraway places. I wish I could visit them too, he said. You will, Theodore, said Emily, when you get your V. Then I'll go to sea. Sí, said Theodore.
Is it just me, or is the way that Theodore says sí very cute? Just thought I'd throw that in there. Anyway, the two tugs begin to practice buttoning onto Emily's lifeboat. Buttoning on is basically tying your tow rope onto the ships to help guide them through the harbor. Now, Theodore had only buttoned onto Emily's lifeboat the times they have practiced, but with eagerness rising, he then says,
Emily, I think I'm ready to button on by myself to a real ship. Well, Emily wasn't so sure about that, but she agreed to ask one of the pilots. Theodore tooted excitedly to Lily. Look at me, Theodore the V.
Oh, Theodore, what are you getting yourself into this time? I can see this is gonna bite you in the bumpers. I can feel it coming. Continuing, as Theodore and Emily head back to the dock, oh look, there's Jersey Boy George again, telling the tugs about his latest adventure, rescuing an oil tanker. We've gotta hear this.
The oil tanker was bigger than 1,000 whales stuck together, said George. Her name was Aria, and she had a broken rudder. I rescued her all by myself. Theodore, interrupted Emily, are we going to practice? Later, replied Theodore. How did you button on? Asked Theodore. First, said George, I turned up both my engines all the way. Then I went straight towards her. At the very last second, roared George, I turned sideways and glided into position. That's the way to button onto a ship like that, even one as tall as 300 walruses, one on top of each other. I wish I was like George, said Hank. Then I could be a V2 and meet lots of giant ships out on the ocean. Then Theodore told Hank that soon he would get his V word. I've been practicing with Emily, and she thinks I might be ready to button on by myself. Right, Emily? Emily? Well, that's strange, said Theodore. I thought we were going to practice some more.
Not 2 seconds ago, you just said, later! What, are you done being mesmerized by George's tales? You really need to stop being such a kiss-up to George, Theodore. He ain't that great. Just kidding. So the following day, a ship named Kirby is coming, and Theodore asks Emily if he can button on first. With Emily still unsure, she decides to ask Pearl to pilot boat.
Has he practiced enough? Asked Pearl. Well, Emily really wasn't sure that Theodore had practiced enough. I'm ready, said Theodore hopefully. Pearl thought about it. Well, she said finally, it's a clear day, calm seas. Then she turned so Theodore would be sure to hear and said, be extra careful and extra slow. We will, agreed Emily.
Anybody notice the big tilt in Emily? Would love to know why her model is so lopsided throughout most of Season 1 so far. Anyway, as the ship arrives, Pearl explains that Kirby is a nervous ship and should be extra careful with him. But leave it to Theodore to start getting just a little too big for his bumpers, and ends up doing something completely foolish.
Theodore? Emily called, but Theodore didn't hear her over his rooming engine. Well, when Kirby, who really was a rather nervous ship, saw the strange tugboat grooming and zooming towards him, he thought it meant to bump right into him. Emily blew her emergency whistle. Well, there was only one thing for Kirby to do. He threw his engines into reverse to back up out of the harbor as fast as he could. But he couldn't avoid the little tug, who seemed to be on a collision course for him. "Theodore, watch where you're going," said Pearl. At the very last second, Theodore spun around sideways towards Kirby. Why aren't I slowing down like George does?" Well, luckily, Theodore only nudged Kirby a little bit. But poor Kirby was so frightened he groaned a terrible groan, and some of his telephone poles rattled overboard right into the harbor. The only good thing about that nudge, I guess, was, well, it got Kirby going, and he headed out to sea, and it looked as if he meant to sail all the way back to England. Emily caught up to Theodore. "Why did you do that?" she said. "Well, that's how George does it," he said.
Okay, a few little things I cannot pass up. First thing, Kirby. Are we really dealing with another Henry? Second, since when the hell does Emily have an emergency whistle? It was never mentioned up until now, and if I'm correct, it's the only time we ever do hear it. But now for the important stuff. Theodore, why? Why would you try to button on like George? This is the second biggest screw-up you've ever done. What the hell, dude? You know, come to think of it, this is sort of like how Thomas would behave. So after all that calamity, Theodore heads back to the dock, where George is surprised to see him return so soon.
"I thought you were moving a cargo ship," he said. "Oh, well," said Theodore, I mean, I did, just not exactly in the right direction." Theodore explained about Kirby and the telephone poles and everything. "I went in straight just like you, and then I turned sideways, but I couldn't slow down." Then George told Theodore that he only buttoned on that way in emergencies. "And besides," said George, "I have extra special engines so I can go in any direction I want. You know, like a helicopter, even sideways. Yours can't do that." Well, when Theodore heard that, he felt very foolish. Now everyone was upset with him.
Yeah, you should feel pretty silly. And I ask again, why would you ever consider pulling such a stupid stunt like that? And the angry remarks don't even end here, as Emily returns sometime later.
"Emily," he said, "are you still angry with me?" Emily frowned and said, "Pearl says it's my fault because I said you'd been practicing, but it looked to her like you hadn't." "I guess I wanted to do it like George," said Theodore. Theodore looked hopefully at Emily, but Emily still looked quite upset. "Now, I know I should have buttoned on the way you showed me," admitted Theodore. "I'll never get to go across the ocean now. Right, Emily?" "George is bigger and stronger than you," replied Emily. "You can't button on like he does." "I'm sorry, Emily," said Theodore. "I need to practice and learn some more. I think I can do it if we work together. Will you help me, Emily?" Just then, they noticed one of Kirby's telephone poles floating in the water. Well, that reminded Theodore of what had happened with Kirby, and that made him feel even worse. "I still think you're ready to button on," said Emily quietly. Well, Theodore was quite surprised. "You do?" he said. "Really?" "Sure," replied Emily. "To Kirby's telephone poles. You can take them back to him." "And apologize to Kirby," said Theodore. And with that, he set off after the poles. "Maybe afterwards," called Emily, "we can go practice again on Willie's Island." Theodore smiled the biggest, sunniest smile at Emily. "See," he said.
And that concludes Theodore Buttons On. Well, what can I say other than this was alright? It wasn't bad, far from it. The moral does hold up pretty nicely for the kiddies. But what's the one thing I've always had a gripe for in certain episodes? You guessed it, Theodore's behavior. And this one gave Theodore yet another strike. Sure, I get he was just excited and couldn't wait to button on, but what pisses me off is how he basically just shoved Emily to the side and literally forgot what they practiced. I'm sorry, but if I want to see a character screw up this badly, I'll watch Thomas's Train. Not to mention, but the ending scene has me all kinds of rallied up. Why would you pick up Kirby's poles after you docked him? There are so many things wrong with that. Other than those minor gripes, as I mentioned, the moral is decent enough, and I did like the visual we got for Willie's Island. Nothing really too interesting about the characters apart from Kirby, whom I would have actually liked to hear speak. And the music was pretty much the familiar ditties we know, with a few new quickies snuck in. Other than that, I can't really say much more about this episode. All I have left to say is, Theodore, you asked for it. Up next is Theodore and the Queen.